and it stays there. Okay. I'm having a little difficulty. I'm using a new browser because I get a worm virus that keeps trying to evade me in this building. Evidence of continental ice sheets cannot be explained by uniformitarianism. That explains more directionally towards creationism, worldwide flood, recent, rather than the long-term evolution. And so we ask the question, what about the phenomena of continental glaciation, about which so much has been written and so many theories developed and so many have been inadequate? There are many present-day glaciers, of course, and even 2 great ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica, but nothing occurring in the present is at all comparable to the great ice sheets of the past, which have supposedly molded so much of the Earth's present surface geology. Without attempting for the present to discuss the validity of the evidence of these ice ages, let it merely be noted that the principle of uniformity is once again, in every single instance, woefully inadequate to account for these continental ice shelves. Dr. Morris, the Ice Age has always been a problem for science. While abundant evidence has been found for continental glaciation, the causes remain enigmatic. Scores of scenarios have been proposed: global cooling, decrease in the sun's intensity, rampant volcanic activity, but none are truly able to bring about such profound changes, none except the creation proposal, that is. They can't bring evidence for all these other things. First, let's talk about the nature of the Ice Age and clear up various misconceptions. To start with, the Ice Age was a time when great ice sheets built up on land. As snow accumulated in extreme northern and southern latitudes, its own weight packed into the ice. And then, because ice is less than rigid, it can flow out from heavy snow accumulation areas into lower latitudes. The glaciers never covered more than a minor portion of the globe. In North America, ice covered much of the central Canada and as far south as Kansas. Weather in the rest of the world was affected, however, but the areas were not under ice. Some propose that there were several ice ages from 4 to 60, each lasting for long periods and separated by vast ages, but the evidence for multiple glaciers is poor. The obvious requirements for ice buildup are more snowfall, and less snow melt. But how does this happen? No schemes shackled by the constraints of uniformitarianism. The false notion in this context that geological happenings which have been observed in recent history can be used to explain events in the unobserved past. Look to the present, not necessarily the past. No scheme shackled by the constraints of uniformitarianism can alter Earth's conditions to that extent. And besides, if things get too cold, the air can't contain much moisture and it doesn't snow much. And so the puzzle remains. A key to more snowfall is more evaporation. And the best way to achieve that is to have warmer oceans. We would also need somewhat warmer winters in polar latitudes to allow for more snowfall and intense weather patterns to transport the evaporated moisture from the oceans to the continents. And then we need colder summers to allow the snow to accumulate over the years. Everyone agrees that these conditions would cause an ice age, but uniformitarian ideas can't allow the Earth systems to change that much. Many creationists think that the flood of Noah's day provides the key. As the flood ended, the oceans probably were warmer than today. The pre-flood world had been uniformly warmer, and during the flood, the fountains of the great deep would have added much heat, as would the tectonic readjustments later in the flood and following it. Tectonic adjustments are deformations such as folding and faulting into the Earth's crust. This warmth would be continual pump of warm moisture into the atmosphere, thus warm, wet winters. Furthermore, and more snow. Furthermore, the land surface at the end of the flood was little more than a mud slick and would have reflected solar radiation without absorbing much heat. The large temperature difference between ocean and land, and coupled with strong polar cooling, would cause intense and prolonged storms. Finally, the late and early post-flood times witnessed extensive volcanism as the Earth struggled to regain crustal equilibrium. This would cloud the atmosphere, bouncing incoming solar radiation back into space, thus colder summers. More evaporation, warmer winters, more intense storms, colder summers. The result? Ice age, which would last until the oceans gave up their excessive heat and the volcanism lessened and the vegetation was reestablished. This likely would take less than 1,000 years, including following the biblical flood. Larry Vardaman states, in the 80s and 90s, considerable emphasis has been placed upon climate and environmental issues in the United States. Much air pollution legislation has been put into force. Long-range climate trends have been observed and predicted. Dire scenarios of dramatic warming with attendant droughts and coastal flooding have been predicted. At the same time, devastating displacements of population centers and agricultural consequences due to a possible new ice age have been presented to the public by other experts. It seems that the scientific establishment and news media have reached a level of hyperactivity or even paranoia. Why has this recent flurry of concern developed in the environmental sciences? This article will attempt to show that one underlying reason has been the interpretation of climate history by uniformitarian processes over millions of years rather than by catastrophic processes over thousands of years. Uniformitarian means geological doctrine that existing processes acting in the same manner as at present that is observable are sufficient to account for all geological changes. So we don't look for anything new. That's a belief system, not science. Thus denying the possibility of creationism, the flood, and so on. Things that have always been the same. The explanation of climatic phenomena by uniformitarian processes requires inherent instabilities in the Earth-atmosphere system which are thought to be triggered by small initial impulses. Fear of triggering such an instability has led to an unreasonable regulation of possible pollutants. Yeah, we go nuts over something that's not improved. The astronomical theory, the current most popular explanation for the ice ages, suggests that the slight changes in orientation and distance from the sun, which the Earth experiences in its orbit, result in small variations in heating the Earth's atmosphere. When the heating is reduced, an ice age occurs, and when it is increased, the excess ice melts and an interglacial period results. All right. Everyone is familiar with the dramatic changes in heating by the sun as the Earth rotates daily on its axis, causing daytime heating and nighttime cooling. Not quite as well understood by many as the annual change of the seasons as the Earth revolves around the sun. Because the Earth's axis of rotation is tilted by 23.5 degrees from the normal place to the plane of its path around the sun, the northern hemisphere is inclined toward the sun during its summer and away from the sun during its winter. This causes greater heating and warmer temperatures in the summer and the winter. The southern hemisphere experiences the same effect but is 6 months out of phase with the northern. This period of Earth's rotation on its axis is approximately 24 hours, and the period of Earth's rotation around the sun is approximately 1 year. Other harmonic variations occur in the orbit of the Earth around the sun, which are familiar to only a few specialists. The Earth experiences a slight wobble as it rotates on its axis. This wobble caused by the gravitational attraction between a slightly non-spherical Earth and the sun, moon, and planets has this period of about 20,000 years. By this, it is meant that the small episodic changes measurable today imply a cycle of 20,000 years from maximum to maximum. In addition, the precession of the equinoxes, the migration to the position of the axis of the elliptical path of the Earth around the sun, also has a period of about 20,000 years. Okay, the angle of the Earth's axial tilt varies between 22 and 24 degrees with a period of about 40,000 years. Another fluctuation is a 100,000-year periodic change in the eccentricity of the annual orbit from circular to elliptic and back again. Each of these small periodic changes, if allowed to experience a full cycle, would cause a small change in heating of the Earth's atmosphere. Yes, grasping at straws here. When the periods of these orbital parameters were compared to the fluctuations in ice sheets and seafloor sediment, thought to have been deposited over millions of years, a correlation was found. Spectral analysis of a dozen seafloor sediments cores in the equatorial Pacific Ocean found peaks at 19, 23, 41, and 100,000 years. The first three peaks matched the periods for wobble, precession, and tilt, which most strongly affected solar heating. However, the strongest cycle in the sediment record occurred at 100,000 years, which corresponds to the period of the eccentricity, the weakest influence on solar heating. Because of this correlation, many paleoclimatologists believe the astronomical theory has been proven. Nevertheless, several major weaknesses in the theory remain. Oh, there you go. We're going to look at that, investigate, and find evidence. No. Long periods of elements of the Earth's orbit, wobble, precision, tilt, eccentricity influenced the solar radiation received, and particularly in its geographical distribution. However, the total heating due to solar radiation integrated over the entire globe annually only varies significantly with eccentricity. Since the total heating due to eccentricity varies by less than 0.2%, a major task therefore has been to show that this small change in heating, in fact the smallest periodic fluctuation in solar heating, could lead to cyclic glaciation of the Earth on the order of 100,000 years. The climate state of the Earth is not a simple function of total solar heating. It also appears to be dependent upon the distribution by latitude. The Earth modulates the solar heating by reflection, retention, and redistribution of the received energy. A complete theory for the interaction of these effects has not yet been developed. So, because confidence is so high, I'm so glad to have something other than worldwide flood and ice age, one single one, comes so high in the statistical basis of the astronomical theory as an explanation for the ice ages, the problems of a small amount of heating due to changes in eccentricity and a lack of complete physical explanation for climate change has not led to abandonment of the theory. Instead, an assumed secondary feedback mechanism of some type has been hypothesized for ice age initiation. In other words, a small cooling pulse during a periodic decrease in solar heating from changes in the orbital parameters triggers some unknown physical mechanism in the Earth atmosphere system which leads to an ice age that we haven't discovered yet. All right, where's the trigger? Where's the trigger? The implication of this, who shot RJ or whatever. The implication of this approach is that the Earth atmosphere system is inherently unstable and a small perturbation can change massive changes in the climate. Investigators have attempted to show evidence for past climate instabilities using recent ice core results from Greenland Ice Core Project, but later data from Greenland, and that GISP, invalidated this interpretation. Grasping at straws here, extreme temperature fluctuations before the last ice age found the GRIP ice core were not present in the GISP ice core. Evidence for climate instability continues to elude researchers. The existence of a climate trigger. To prove the connection between climate fluctuations and fluctuations in solar heating due to orbital variations is an assumption, not a proven mechanism, and has led to the wild speculations such seen frequently in both technical and popular literature. If a trigger for ice ages truly exists in our Earth atmosphere system, then we should obviously be very careful not to do anything which would release the trigger. An inadvertent release of such a trigger could lead possibly to a chaotic weather condition, flooding and drought. Under such conditions, we should obviously restrict the release of pollutants into the atmosphere like smokes and particulates which are known to produce cooling. However, the assumption of a trigger does not necessarily mean that one exists. In fact, most evidence suggests that the atmosphere is a very stable system and catastrophic events are required to cause climatic changes as massive as an ice age. There we go again. I believe the assumption of a trigger is a result of unjustified confidence in the astronomical theory, which in turn is based on uniformitarian processes over millions of years. Lots of assumptions. The current research which is being conducted is to demonstrate that the events of the Genesis flood would naturally produce an ice age. The residual heat remaining in the oceans after the flood would release tremendous quantities of moisture and fall as snow in the polar regions and on mountains for several hundred years after the flood. If the ice sheets and layers of seafloor sediments were not laid down slowly over long periods of time, but rapidly over last few thousand years following the global flood described in Genesis, then the astronomical theory is completely wrong. If the astronomical theory is wrong, there is no need for a trigger, and the concern for a fragile, unstable atmosphere which can suddenly revert to a new ice age is unjustified. There you go. Moving on. Sudden warming of the climate. We'll do that next time.